She turned 80 today, but no one remembered. No calls, no cards, not even a knock on the door. In the quiet house that smelled faintly of dust and rain, Eleanor Bennett sat in her wheelchair, staring at the tiny birthday cake she'd bought for herself. One candle, one wish, one more year of waiting for someone who might never come back. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, laughter echoing down the street, until a single father, holding his daughter's hand, saw the old woman crying behind the glass. And that was the moment everything began to change. The rain began as a mist you couldn't quite see, only feel. It gathered in pearl-sized beads along the rusting bars of the iron fence and slid down the flaking white paint of the porch, railing an old house keeping count in weather rather than years. Inside, Eleanor Bennett unfolded a paper napkin with the care of someone who feared small things might break if handled too quickly. The bakery box on her lap smelled faintly of vanilla and sugar. The sort of smell that, once upon a time, had meant family. She had bought the smallest cake they sold, a 2-layer circle narrow as a hatbox lid, with the word Eleanor piped in wobbly pink frosting by a teenager who looked embarrassed to be writing the name of a stranger. Eleanor balanced the box on her knees, which she no longer trusted, and counted the steps to the front window. Her wheelchair squeaked, an apologetic sound that never failed to make her feel like a burden, even when she was completely alone. She rested at the glass to catch her breath and watched the neighborhood move on with itself, a dog tugging a man toward a puddle, a woman in a blue coat pulling a boy's hood up, cars yawning past, wipers ticking. 80, she thought. She let the word land inside her like a pebble in water. 80. And today, she would blow out a candle without someone to giggle at her. 80. And even the silence had edges. She set the little cake on the kitchen table, the way one sets down a heavy memory, reached for a single candle, and with hands that had taught 100 children where middle C sits, she struck a match. The flame climbed and trembled, as if equally surprised to be here. The wick caught, and the candle stood brave and ridiculous. A lighthouse, in a room that didn't need saving. "Happy birthday, Elle," she whispered. Because some habits resist extinction. She inhaled to blow, but stopped. One more moment. One more look out the window. The rain had thickened, scattered the street into rippling patches. A delivery van crept by. Somewhere, across the road, a screen door banged, and someone laughed. She closed her eyes, made a wish so small it felt like a secret between bones. "Please, let there be a voice besides mine in this house today." The match burned down to her fingers. She flinched, and the tiny jolt wrested the candle off its perch. It toppled into the frosting and carved a shallow, clumsy canyon. She startled again, bumped the table, and the cake slid. She reached, but her right arm lagged one of those delays. Her body now imposed, and the box skated, bumped the edge, and tipped. Eleanor gasped. The cake smacked the floor, icing first. The sound was so soft it felt like an apology. She stared at it lying there, its pretty piped name married to linoleum. The candle rolled in a small circle and settled, as if too tired to keep defying gravity. For a long minute, nothing in the house moved. Eleanor's breath came high and quick, like someone climbing stairs 2 at a time. It wasn't that she couldn't clean it. She could. She could get a towel, and press, and wipe, and sigh, and press, and the floor would be sticky, and the house would smell of sugar. It was that the cake felt like the idea of celebration, and now it lay belly down on a kitchen floor, and the fragile thing in her, what she never named because to name it would be to admit it might be gone, began to recede. She set her hands on her lap, and very quietly let her head bow. Across the street, Michael Carter pulled his old pickup into the driveway as the rain shifted from mist to thread. The brakes squealed in the small way that made his daughter giggle. "Dad, the truck is singing again," Lily said from the back seat, her words puffing clouds on the window as she drew a smiley face with her finger. "That's right," Michael said, smiling despite the fatigue that had been stitched into him for 3 years. It sings whenever it misses the mechanic. Which is weird, because I am the mechanic. Lily laughed and kicked her rain boots together. She was 6, and the world still held its surprises in open palms. Her cheeks flush, her ponytail slightly crooked. She smelled faintly of crayons and the half-eaten apple in her lunchbox. Her mother's eyes. Michael swallowed once and opened his door. "Grab your backpack, Bug." "Already got it," she said, swinging it onto her shoulder with a small grunt. He paused to watch her hop out. The boots, finding every puddle like destiny. It did something to his chest, that careless joy. It always did. They were halfway up their walkway when Lily stopped, the way children do when a thought elbows its way to the front. She was looking across at the house, with the peeling porch and the iron fence that looked like it once wanted to be pretty. "Daddy," she said. Michael followed her gaze. The house belonged to the old woman he had seen only twice since they moved here. Once in a wheelchair on the porch, a book open but her eyes on the horizon, and once at the mailbox, struggling with an envelope that fought her like a stubborn jar. He had waved both times. The second time, he had crossed the street to help. She'd said, "Thank you," in a voice like a violin played softly through a wall. "What is it?" he asked. "The lady," Lily said. "She's crying." Eleanor hadn't realized the light made a mirror of the glass. She couldn't see what Michael and Lily could. The slump, the lifting of hands to eyes, the way shoulders telegraph grief even when the body is tired of movement. Michael felt a familiar regret how fast a day can turn without any help at all. He put a hand on Lily's head as if to balance her. "Maybe she dropped something," he said. "Like her cake." Lily said it with such certainty that Michael looked again and saw pink smudged near the window, a smear on the sill that the rain hadn't reached. "Come on," he said, finding himself already turning back to the truck. "We're going to the bakery. The one with the good donuts?" Lily's eyes widened. "The very one." They returned 10 minutes later with a white box tied in twine and a balloon. Lily insisted on purchasing with her carefully hoarded allowance. The balloon said "Yay" in multicolored letters. It wasn't an 80, but it was exuberant, which felt adjacent to appropriate. On the porch, Michael knocked gently. At first, there was no sound. Then, the faint whirring of wheels, the soft bump of a threshold, made too tall by an old carpenter who never imagined the house would outlive anyone's walking. The door opened a few inches, and Eleanor peered through the gap. "Hello," Michael said, a smile that asked permission. "I'm so sorry to intrude," he added quickly. "We live across the street. I'm Michael, and this is my daughter, Lily. We thought if it's okay, could we sing to you?" Eleanor looked from his face to the child's and back. Something in Lily's eyes held no agenda, except the most dangerous one: kindness. Eleanor hesitated for a beat too long, then stepped back and widened the door. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the invisible dust of old books. Michael noticed a piano in the living room, its wood buckled in the places where time collects. Lily noticed the cat that wasn't their houses like this, always felt like they should have cats, and then noticed the single candle on the table, extinguished and bent like a tired dancer. "Happy birthday," Lily said, balloon rising behind her like a speech bubble. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, the words as small as a kneaded dough ball before it rises. She looked to Michael, who lifted the box. "We brought cake," he said. "It's not much, but it's upright." He tried a laugh, felt it fray into quiet. "Chocolate." The girl at the counter said chocolate. "Solves problems I didn't even know I had." Eleanor's mouth did something unexpected. It smiled. It surprised her. She felt it arrive, and be there anyway. "I'm Eleanor," she said, as if auditioning the name for a new room. "Please, come in, if you'd like." They lit the candle, the replacement candle, unbent and stiffer in its optimism than the first, and Lily insisted on turning off the light for ambience, a word she had stolen from a cooking show and loved because it looked like a dancer when written. They sang, the way strangers do when they're trying to knit a minute together without dropping stitches. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened. Her hands lay quiet in her lap. At the final note, Lily clapped once, too loud for the room, and then immediately put a hand to her mouth. Eleanor opened her eyes and laughed, an honest one this time, which felt like a small earthquake. "Make a wish," Lily said solemnly. Eleanor looked at the candle. It made a bright triangle on the frosting and warmed an inch of air that would forget the gift as soon as it cooled. She didn't close her eyes this time. She blew, and the smoke curled up like a thought. "Thank you," she said. And then, because the only way to hold something is to carry it forward, she added, "Would you sit a while?" They did. Michael cut the cake into uneven slices, and no one objected. Lily asked 100 questions, because 6 is the right number for that. Did Eleanor like cats? Did she play piano? Did she know any birthdays that weren't on the same day as today? Eleanor answered with patience that surprised her. And, in answering, she discovered she remembered things she'd forgotten she knew. How to tell stories to a child while keeping an eye on an adult for clues. How to describe the way a C chord felt like standing in a doorway and smelling rain. She told them she had taught music at the elementary school up on Maple for 32 years. "That's why there's a piano," Lily concluded, as if solving a mystery. "Well," Eleanor said, "it's also because pianos are stubborn. They refuse to leave." Michael rose to inspect it. He ran his hand along the cracked varnish and the stuck key he could spot on sight. "May I?" he asked. "Please," Eleanor said, then hesitated. "I'm afraid a few keys have lost their nerve." Michael pressed one. The note arrived late and sounded like it had come from the next room. But it arrived. "They're shy. Not lost," he said. "We can coax them back." "We?" Eleanor caught the word as you catch a glass sliding toward an edge. "I meant, if you like." He felt suddenly young and awkward. A teenager asking to carry books. "I could see about fixing a few sticky hammers. And I bet Lily would like a lesson." "I would." "I would." Lily bounced on the couch. "I want to learn the song from the movie about the snow." "I can't legally teach you that song without compulsory eye-rolling," Eleanor said, and the joke made her a little giddy with the feeling of being someone who can still cause laughter. Outside, the rain gentled, and the afternoons slid forward the way afternoons do when they aren't asked to be any more than they are. Michael checked his watch, conscious of dinner and bath and checklists that had defined his life since the night a blue-uniformed doctor had spoken in the gentle, final voice people learn in medical school. He glanced back at Eleanor, who looked somehow smaller and larger at the same time. He saw, without being told, the scaffolding she used to move through days. He understood, without analysis, that the house knew her better than anyone did. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Lily asked, before either adult had decided how to make the departure graceful. "If it's not an imposition," Michael said. "It would be a gift," Eleanor replied, and she meant it. She didn't know to what she had just agreed. She only knew that air had returned to rooms that had not breathed in years. They returned the next day with a bag of screws and felt squares, a tiny lubricant bottle, and a paper Lily had decorated with crooked musical notes that looked like birds trying to agree on direction. Michael lifted the piano's fallboard with the reverence of a promise. He worked slowly, asking the instrument what it needed as if it could answer. Eleanor watched from her place near the window, and then, without meaning to, she began to hum. It started as a sliver of melody, the kind one leaves in grocery store aisles by accident, only to hear it later in a stranger's mouth. Lily turned her head and smiled. Michael stopped, listened, and smiled too. The house took the sound and put it everywhere on the ceiling, on the backs of chairs, in the seam of the curtains. "Could you play something?" Michael asked, quietly, like asking a wild bird to take a seed from your palm. Eleanor's right hand disobeyed her less than her right leg did. She rolled her chair forward, set trembling fingers on the keys, and waited for the panic to pass. Then she pressed the notes of an old hymn that had no particular religion, only a sense of returning. The bass lagged where the hammer stuck. The trebles sang as if to cover for a friend. By the end, Eleanor's breath had steadied, and her eyes were wet for a reason that did not make her sad. They did this for a week. They put simple dates to the ritual: Wednesday, 4 o'clock, Friday, 3:30. Lily learned where middle C sits and how to hold her wrists like a teacup. Michael learned that the hinge on the front step could be coaxed out with a screwdriver and a firm hand. He learned that the mailbox needed a new latch. Eleanor learned the shape of their footsteps and the sound of a child's laugh when she nails a note she has been missing for 3 days. On the 8th day, rain gave way to the kind of sun that feels like grace. Michael was in the front hallway swapping out a dead bulb when he knocked a shoebox off the highest shelf of the coat closet. It tumbled, lid ajar, and the contents skidded across the floor. Photographs, a folded flag, a key with no home, a hospital bracelet so old it could have been from a different century. He bent to gather them, the reflex to put spilled things back where they go. When he saw a face, he didn't see it fully at first, only a portion of a jawline and the curve of a grin that was not his. He reached for the photo, and there it was. A young man in army fatigues, a sun-scorched smile, a hand around a woman he recognized now as a younger Eleanor. The young man's eyes were a precise blue that Michael had shaved around every morning for 20 years. "Where did you get this picture?" he asked. Voice so hoarse he barely recognized it. Eleanor wheeled closer, the sound of rubber on wood suddenly the loudest thing in the world. She peered and then moved back a fraction as if she had seen a ghost and was deciding whether to welcome it. "That's my son," she said. The sentence, a ladder she climbed. Slowly. "That's David." Michael felt something inside break and reassemble. He had a photograph of his father in his own old shoebox, taken 10 years after this one. The same grin tempered by duty. The same eyes. The same unfixable echo of a loss that had no clean edges. "My father," he said, in a voice that was nothing and everything at once. "That's my father." They stared at each other across a small hallway that suddenly contained a lifetime. Eleanor's mouth worked before words would form. Her hand lifted and hovered an inch above Michael's cheek, then fell back, as if some last custom of caution demanded it. He left before I could forgive him," she said, and the confession came out like a breath she had been holding since the day it became necessary. "We fought about nothing the day the stroke happened, and then I pushed him away when I needed him. He went north for work and didn't come back. I don't know where the years went. I wrote letters that had nowhere to go." Michael swallowed hard. The hallway narrowing, then widening, then narrowing again. His father had spoken of distance like weather, something that arrives, something you endure. He had not spoken of his mother at all, only once. A sentence so oddly shaped that Michael had never known where to put it. "Some people you love by staying. Some by getting out of the way." "He died when I was 19, Michael said, and the words, though a decade old, still surprised him with their bluntness. "Car accident. Night road, rain. A deer. It was sudden." Eleanor closed her eyes. There were tears, yes, but also a kind of apology that had no addressee and every addressee simultaneously. When she opened them, she looked not at the man but through time to the boy who had been left with a father who carried silence like a second wallet. "You have his eyes," she whispered. Michael laughed without humor. "People say that." He shrugged. "Sometimes it feels like a debt." "May I?" Eleanor asked, and when he nodded, she placed the tips of her fingers against his cheek in the gentlest press, as if confirming a fact she'd been told but not allowed to believe, that there remained someone to carry the shape of a love that had been put down too early. From the living room, Lily's voice rose, singing the shorthand of a song she only half knew. "Let it go! Let it go!" And then giggling at herself. The exquisite ordinary sound of it cut through the stunned silence. "Great! Grandma!" Lily called, having given Eleanor the promotion spontaneously, without committee vote. "Can we do the thumbs-up game?" Eleanor drew a slow breath and then another. When she spoke, her voice had been given back its instrument. "Yes," she said, wiping at her eyes with the edge of a sleeve. "Yes, we can." That night, after Michael tucked Lily into bed and read the familiar book about the bear who mistakes a hat for a friend, he stood in the doorway and watched her sleep. He thought about inheritance, what it gives you, and what it withholds, and about the strangest kinds of miracles. The ones that arrive as a knock at your door when you've forgotten you ever had a door. He walked to the kitchen, sat at the small table, and wrote a note on a grocery list, because the backs of grocery lists are where true decisions are forged. He would not let this be a moment that swelled and then receded. He would be the one who stayed. Days braided themselves into weeks. Michael set up automatic deliveries for Eleanor's groceries and put little labels on the shelves, not because she couldn't remember, but because thinking should be a privilege, not an obligation. He fixed the front steps, installed a ramp he could break down if the city complained, and argued with a clerk at the utility company until they admitted the bill had been miscalculated for months. Lily learned her scales and also learned where the tea is kept and how to hand someone a cup in a way that does not imply pity. Eleanor learned to say, "Thank you," without setting a counterweight of, "I'm sorry," on the other end of the sentence. Every Friday, Michael sat on the porch swing and recounted the mechanics of the week, waiting for parts that didn't come, customers who did, the satisfaction of an engine that catches and runs true. Eleanor listened like a musician, hearing rhythm beneath words. She told him stories too, carefully at first, as if unwrapping something fragile she wasn't sure he would want. She told him about David and the way his laughter arrived before he did when he was young. About the night of her stroke and the way an argument can steal an entire decade if you let it. About the guilt that keeps company long after the reason for it has been buried. "Guilt is loyal in exactly the wrong way," she said one afternoon, looking at the sky as if it had sent her a bill. "It stays when everything else leaves." "Sounds like a bad friend," Michael replied. "It is." She smiled sidelong. "But we are not taking new applications." On the morning of her 81st birthday, the sun rose with the exaggerated enthusiasm of a stagehand. Michael and Lily arrived early. Lily carrying a shoebox of sheet music tied with a ribbon that had once been part of a Halloween costume. The living room had been transformed in the ways that matter. Fresh flowers in a jar, a new lamp casting a warm pool over the piano, a tiny wooden frame on the bookshelf with a photograph of Michael, Lily, and Eleanor squeezed together so closely you could see the lines around their smiles like parentheses. "Happy birthday, Grandma," Michael said, and the word fell with the authority of a fact finally acknowledged. Eleanor's eyes shone in that particular way. People's eyes shine when they realize the future is no longer an argument. "Happy birthday to me," she replied, dignified in her delight. They lit 2 candles. Lily insisted that numbers didn't matter as much as wishes, and sang. The room sang with them. The windows, the carpet, the nearly fixed G. Eleanor blew and did not think. "Oh, please, let someone be here," she thought. "Thank you for letting them stay." After cake, Lily climbed onto the piano bench for the recital she had been preparing in secret. The first 8 measures of a simple piece. Each note, a step across a river. She finished with a flourish she had borrowed from a cartoon conductor and turned, glowing. "That was perfect," Eleanor said. "It wasn't perfect," Lily said, scandalized by the imprecision. "It was perfect for today," Eleanor amended, earning a solemn nod. They moved to the porch for presents. The neighborhood paraded by in its usual way, but now several people waved they hadn't waved before, neighbors who had noticed Michael's truck, Lily's drawings taped to Eleanor's front window, A mail carrier left a small stack of cards, 2 of which were from children Eleanor had taught 3 decades earlier. The words were messy and earnest. They thanked her for making the loud world feel like a song. Halfway through the afternoon, a small gray sedan rolled to the curb and idled. A woman stepped out, cautious, carrying a foil-covered dish the way one carries news. One hasn't decided how to deliver. She was in her 50s, hair loosened from its clips by the breeze, eyes that moved quickly because they had to. "Can I help you?" Michael asked gently. Standing, without making it look like standing, the woman swallowed. Her voice, when it came, sounded like someone standing at the edge of a dive they'd promised themselves they would take. My name is Ruth," she said, looking at Eleanor. "Ruth Hargrave. I used to live 2 streets over. You taught me piano in 6th grade." A small, incredulous smile touched her face. "I heard I saw on the community page that it was your birthday. I thought if you don't mind." Eleanor blinked. The day had already offered the maximum amount of grace she thought a person could reasonably expect. And yet, here was more. "I would be honored," she said. Ruth climbed the steps and set the dish, awkward, on the small side table. She looked at Michael and Lily, then back to Eleanor, and something in her rearranged. "I always meant to come back and say thank you," she said. "You used to tell me that sometimes the kindest thing we do for strangers is make it easier for them to be kind to somebody else. I didn't understand then." She gestured toward Michael and Lily. "I do now. They ate too much cake and not enough fruit, which is the correct ratio for birthdays." The afternoon softened at the edges, the way late light cushions people's faces and makes even unhappy houses look briefly redeemed. Michael stood, stretched, and walked to the railing. He looked out at the little slice of street that had contained his before and after, and he thought about what had brought him across it the first day, pity, maybe, or instinct. But what had kept him crossing afterward was not pity or obligation. It was an odd, ordinary love, born inside a kitchen where a new candle had been lit beside an old one. Eleanor wheeled herself to the threshold, where house becomes porch becomes world. She looked at the man who had knocked at her door with a box of sugar and a child who believed in balloons. She looked at the child who had promoted her to great-grandma without paperwork. She looked beyond them at the slice of sky that had presided over both her loneliness and her reunion, unchanged and yet changed because of what she had learned under it. "Sometimes," she said, to no one and to everyone, "family finds you by walking over." Michael turned. He put a hand on her shoulder. He had his father's eyes, yes, but they looked at her with a different inheritance altogether. "Happy 81st, Grandma," he said. Eleanor smiled. And the house, which had counted too many birthdays by rain alone, counted this one by laughter and the soft clatter of plates and the certainty of footsteps that would return on Wednesday at 4 and Friday at 3:30, and the 1,000 minutes in between where kindness keeps the lights on. Inside, the piano waited, its stubborn G almost right. It would never be perfect. Nothing that had lived this long and been this loved could be, but it was perfect for today, and the next measure waited, and the hands that would play it knew where to begin. Spring arrived in hesitant colors, like someone testing whether the world was ready to bloom again. The trees on Maple Street broke into small, nervous blossoms, and the air carried that particular smell of wet earth and promises. Eleanor's piano had been tuned. Not perfectly perfection bored her now, but enough that every note sounded like gratitude. When she played, the neighbors could hear it through open windows. Old jazz standards, hymns she no longer believed in but still respected, and sometimes the delicate chaos of Lily's scales tumbling after hers. Michael had started coming by in the evenings. After closing the garage, he'd park the truck, lean his shoulder against the porch post, and tell her about the day, the customers, the engines, the small victories of keeping something alive that wasn't supposed to last. She listened the way only the elderly can. not for details, but for the tremor beneath them. Sometimes he'd catch her looking at the framed photo of his father and ask quietly, "Do you ever forgive the dead?" And Eleanor would smile with that half-sad, half-wise curve of her lips. "You don't forgive them," she said one night. "You forgive the silence they left behind." In early May, the neighborhood association organized a small community fair. Lily, of course, demanded that Eleanor come. "You have to see me win the ring. Toss," she declared, crossing her tiny arms. "I practiced." Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't been farther than the grocery store in years, but the way Lily's confidence filled the room left no room for excuses. So that Saturday, Michael loaded her wheelchair into the truck, tucked a blanket around her knees, and they drove toward the park. The fair was everything her house hadn't been for so long: loud, colorful, untidy with joy. Kids sprinted past like wind with sneakers. The air smelled of cotton candy and barbecue smoke. Eleanor blinked, overwhelmed at first, until Lily grabbed her hand. "Come on, Grandma. I'll show you the ducks." And there she was, 81 years old, paralyzed on one side, and somehow being dragged by a 6-year-old into the world again. They reached the lake, and Eleanor laughed when Lily tossed breadcrumbs too enthusiastically, splashing herself. Michael watched from behind, his heart a strange mix of ache and awe. The image of his daughter and grandmother generations, stitched together by chance and courage, was one he would later keep framed on his nightstand. By summer, Eleanor had a routine that would have sounded like fiction a year before. Morning tea with Michael, piano practice with Lily, short walks in her chair down to the end of the street. Neighbors started stopping by to say hello. Some even asked if she gave lessons. So, one afternoon, she placed a hand-painted sign by her gate: "Piano lessons first note free." It wasn't for money, it was for noise, the good kind. Within a week, she had 2 students, both shy and clumsy but filled with the kind of wonder she recognized from her own childhood. Her living room began to echo with wrong notes and laughter, the kind of imperfection that proves something's alive. Michael fixed up the porch light, replaced the fence posts, and sometimes just sat listening from outside. "You turned this place into a music school," he teased one evening. Eleanor chuckled. "No," she said. "I just let the house remember what it was built for." That autumn, a letter arrived official-looking, with a government seal. Michael brought it in, curious, while Eleanor frowned at the envelope. Inside was an offer from the local arts council. They had heard of her community piano program through the town's social page. They wanted to sponsor instruments for more kids, under her supervision. Eleanor blinked at the letter until the words blurred. Then she laughed softly. "Imagine that," she murmured. "A woman who couldn't walk, now running a music program." Michael grinned. "That's what happens when you keep saying yes." Months passed. Seasons folded like pages. Lily grew taller. Her fingers reached octaves now. Michael's hair began to gray just enough to look intentional. And Eleanor, though her body stayed fragile, seemed lighter, as if forgiveness had bones and hers had finally stopped aching. On Christmas Eve, they gathered again. This time, the house was full. Neighbors, students, even Ruth with her foil-covered casserole. They sang carols, terribly out of tune, and nobody minded. When the clock neared midnight, Eleanor insisted on one final piece. She played the same hymn from the first day Michael had asked her to try the one about returning, about home. Her hands shook a little, but the notes didn't care. When she finished, everyone clapped, and Lily leaned over, whispering, "You did it, Grandma. All the keys worked." Eleanor smiled. "Yes, darling," she said softly. "All the keys worked." She looked around at the people, the laughter, the warmth, and thought how wild it was that a life can turn on something as small as a knock at the door. Weeks later, the town paper ran a small article. "Local woman turns her lonely house into a haven for music and hope." They quoted her at the end. Words that would later be printed on the music room's wall. "Sometimes, we wait for the world to come back to us. But sometimes, all it takes is one person or one small act to remind the world we're still here. The piano stood by the window, sunlight across its keys. A faint hum hung in the air, the echo of hands, laughter, and all the lives that had found their way through a broken melody. The house on Maple Street no longer counted years by silence. It counted them by songs,